Hello everyone, welcome back to Flying Solo with Kat, and today I'm so excited to finally get to Star Wars Hyperspace Stories number 8. I ordered this comic when it came out, and it finally has arrived. I did get the variant cover, so that's why it took a bit longer, but oh my goodness, I'm so excited to talk about the story of this comic, what it means for our characters, and also just my overall thoughts on hyperspace stories and what these stories are trying to tell and how they do help the sequels in a lot of ways. Before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for the support. I know the Ahsoka reviews were kind of getting redundant, but I felt like they were necessary. We will not be getting another Star Wars IP for a good another 6 months to almost probably a year. So thank you all for keeping with me. I promise there really won't be much more of those types of videos. I will probably go back into a lot of the TV shows and do my thoughts on those, but it won't be as redundant as Ahsoka was. So I'm so sorry if that annoyed any of you, but it is over, it is done, and I'm so ready to talk about some awesome Star Wars. So let's go ahead and get into it. I do just want to highlight the beautiful artist of these comics. The inks were by Andy Dugan, and I will link down his Facebook in the description. The color was by Dan Jackson, who I will link in the Marvel website down below, and actually I've read some of his comics that he's done colors for, and they're absolutely beautiful. I really liked the vibrant colors in this comic, and it really made it stand out. The variant art cover, which is the one that I have, is by Carrie Nord, and I will link their Instagram down below as well. So go give them some love, go see some of the stuff that they've done. I always, with these videos, I like to highlight not only the content, but the artistry that goes into these types of things and what gives us these characters. And with this comic, I will say that it was very well done compared to a couple of the others. Kylo Ren was beautifully rendered. I think this is one of the comics that he looks best in. I think he looks really, really well. Snoke was done very, very great as well. There weren't many scenes with him, but the ones that were inked and colored in were very, very well done. Hux looked okay. No comic artist seems to have been able to replicate Donald Gleason's facial structure, which is completely valid because I can't draw him either. So what they did with him, of course, we have a jawline Hux, but I don't think it was that bad. Compared to the Force Awakens comic, which I do have, oh my god, he looks scary in that comic in some of those panels. In others, he looks absolutely beautiful, but a lot of the panels in that comic are very scary, and I do not like how he looks. But in this comic, I completely went with it, and it wasn't jarring at all. So congratulations, the artist on this comic. It was very well done, and I really enjoyed looking at it and as well as reading it. So I did just want to say that Hyperspace comics, Hyperspace stories for Star Wars, if you don't already know, are geared more towards kids. They don't have as much graphic content as you would think of compared to Dark Droids. If anyone has read those, you know that it is very gory and very, very dark. It's in the name. And it's definitely not hyperspace stories that are probably geared more towards your kids and kind of a fun read. But, of course, that didn't affect my reading at all. It was written quite well, and it was, drawn quite well. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I feel like a couple people in the community were expecting this amazing comic that was going to get into Hux's abuse again and Kylo Ren and all of that, and that was totally not focused on in this comic. And they seemed like very blatant characters. But of course, I'm going to dive into that and put my own little spin on it. So I always do tell people, like, with comics, do not expect the world. Expect what they can give you and what can fit into 20 pages of a comic book. So with this one, a lot of people were underwhelmed. It was why it wasn't talked about a lot, and it really didn't get much circulation. And I think that's for a couple reasons, which I will go over really soon. But overall, it was very good. I enjoyed reading it, and as I said, the art and the overall writing of the comic really elevated it to that level. So let's start with the overall story. So basically, I'm going to summarize this. Please, if you have a chance, it literally was $5 at my comic shop. Like, it's not like they're asking you to pay $20 to $30 to buy this comic, but I would say it's worth it. For me, I'm a collector, so it's definitely worth me having this comic in my collection. I still do not have the Rises Kylo Ren and the General Hux comic. I'm still searching for those, but I digress. For this one, definitely to have in my collection is amazing. But as for the overall story, basically Snoke wants Kylo and Hux to show power of the First Order on Caraxus, which seems to me that it's a outer rim planet. I searched it up on Wikipedia, and unfortunately there was nothing I can find on it. This was the first time it actually shows up in Hyperspace stories, so that was a bit disappointing, but I was getting the vibe that it was an outer rim planet, and we've seen that with the First Order, that they basically started from the outer rim and then worked their way to the core worlds. But they didn't really focus much on the core worlds because that was what the New Republic was focused on. So I'm just going to say it's an outer rim planet, and, that's kind of what I goes with. Snoke calls out Kylo for not being fully on board, while Hux thinks the presence of a Star Destroyer is enough. So Kylo is more, like, well, I can just kill him. I don't care. But Snoke wants him to see basically the more political side of it. And Hux is just like, well, I have a Star Destroyer. I don't know what more you want from me. And, all of that. But basically they have to go down there and have to try to take the planet either by force. But Hux is going to try to do it politically. And Hux tries to work with Kylo, and, they have their own elevator scene. And Hux basically talks to himself while Kylo is just standing there and trying to make up a plan, but ends up ultimately giving Kylo most of the control. Hux says, you know what? Fine. If you think you can do this, and you think you can get people to give you what you want, then I will give you the full rings. So Kylo uses brute force to make the Caraxians obey, and of course it doesn't work, and Hux basically laughs at him, and Kylo realizes that, okay, I have to go through a different approach. So Hux realizes that the city is being protected by a wall from the Bromelish, which is basically like a big green monster. As I said before, there was nothing I could find on Wikipedia. It was not an existing creature in the Star Wars universe, which I think is okay, but I would have, definitely preferred having something we would have known of, but it's okay. Pretty decent design. Hux has an idea to go basically let it free and make the Caraxians obey to them so the troopers can save the city. And of course that doesn't go to plan either. While this is happening, Kylo searches for Kelvin, which is the man who basically can give the rights to the planet over to the First Order. They are hiding, and Kylo senses someone in the Force. Now, this is a bit confusing, and this confuses a lot of people, but he tells the woman and Kelvin, the mother and father, I'm guessing, that he does not want to hurt anyone as long as they cooperate. And there is a child there, and he sees the child, and the object they are holding still has traces of the Force. Now, when this panel first came out, you had a whole bunch of people going, you see, like, Kylo Ren is nice. Like, he didn't kill a child because they had a Force signature, that it was Force sensitive. I think people read that panel wrong. Please don't get mad at me. But the object that the child was holding was actually one that Rey gave to Finn. And Rey actually held it in Hyperspace Stories number 4. And I'm kind of thinking that maybe the stuffed animal Finn, or Rey gave to Finn, and Finn gave it to this child, and that Force sensitivity is in that object. And I think people just saw Kylo sparing a child's life and were like, oh my god, you see? Like, that's Ben Solo. I digress. I'll get into that in a bit. But I'm pretty sure, I'm actually absolutely positive that it was the object that the child was holding that Kylo sensed in the Force. Anyway, it does not matter, though, because... Oh, and also timeline doesn't add up, so I will get into that later. As I said, this comic is a bit confusing of when it actually takes place. But before Kylo can legitimately do anything, he basically senses Hux in distress and goes and saves him. Yeah, we'll get into that in a bit too. And basically, it shows the Caraxians that the First Order has power, and they get Kelvin to give them the rights to the planet, and they go back to Snoke, who is pleased, and Kylo tells him about feeling something in the Force, and Snoke instructs him that the Force can live through objects, and that he has much training to do, and that's where it ends. So if that seemed a bit quick, yeah, you're right. But as I said before, like, this is a Hyperspace Stories comic. You shouldn't expect so much lore and so much to go into it, but I am going to rip this comic to shreds and really bring it down to the bare bones that it is so not needed, and really kind of overanalyze this comic. So please stick with me, but I'm going to go over Kylo, Hux, and then also as individual characters, and then together, because that is also very interesting as well. So let's jump into it. So first, I do want to start off with Kylo and his characterization here. For me, it was really interesting to see more of the held back, not as angry side of him. He didn't have much to say, to be honest. I would have thought that this would have been more dialogue heavy, but it actually really wasn't. You didn't have much of him speaking. The only time he spoke was either a little bit to Snoke or mainly Hux. So for him, his characterization with Snoke especially was really, really, really good and really, really interesting. I've always been Snoke basically groomed Kylo. It's basically written into the story. That's the entire point of his character. But for me, my headcanon is Snoke is very abusive, right? Snoke is basically Palpatine, and Palpatine was very abusive to Anakin, Vader, if we do remember that. And for me, I do feel like that's definitely Snoke being abusive to Kylo. And for him, basically, he says that mask. He brings up the mask again, and that you're hiding behind that mask, and you can't actually do the job. By the way, I literally have the comic right here, just making sure my facts are correct, so I'm sorry if the turning of paper gets a bit annoying. But for him, it just seems like Kylo doesn't much care in this comic, which I think honestly works for him until the presence of the Force comes up. And I do think that people overestimated him. That's not the right word. I do think people misread his actions when talking to Kelvin and their family. I think he was just trying to get the job done, and I think he found it unnecessary to kill them. Now, people could say, oh, that's Ben Solo, looking through him, and, that's not Kylo Ren and everything. It's hard, because for me, Kylo Ren, I want him to be evil and kill people. That's the whole point of his characterization, and that's why, for me, Ben Solo and Kylo Ren are very, very different people, and I have to draw a line between the two. But for me, definitely, I will agree with people to say that Ben Solo very much showed through this comic and through his characterization being a lot more held back instead of, having that rough anger. And the only time he did have that anger was when, Snoke basically belittled him in saying you have, much to learn. And for him, I think he's more focused on the brute force and forcing people to do his will instead of actually talking it out and like Hux and doing things a lot more, should I say, politically correct. But for one of the lines I found really interesting, and one of the things that I really, really liked, because I love Snoke and Kylo's relationship. It's very much an abusive master and a, scared puppy. And for me, that's really important, and I do wish they did show that really, really well in The Last Jedi, but I do wish it was developed on a lot more. On the last panel, Snoke says, yes, it could have, or it could have been a thing. You'll find even objects can be touched by the Force. It's up to you to see them more clearly. So he puts the blame on Kylo for missing that. Then he says, the fact that you couldn't tells me just how undisciplined you are. And Kylo responds with, yes, Supreme Leader. So he's Snoke is very abusive, and people that say he's not, and it was fully Kylo Ren's fault for turning the dark side, I think there were a lot of factors into it. I don't think it was fully his fault, but I think that you saying Snoke was just, there to do whatever, I think is completely missing the point of Kylo and Snoke's characterization of being this abusive master, to this apprentice, and him wanting, having someone actually care about him, in his eyes, and wanting to please him, which, could lead him to falling more into the dark side. And I found that very, very interesting. But other than that, Kylo was very subdued in this comic and didn't do much coming from himself when it involved Hux. Oh my gosh, he did so much. So that was it for Kylo, though. I will go ahead and get into Hux, though. For Hux, his characterization in this comic was top notch, and I just thank you so much, because every comic that I read, even the official General Hux comic, I felt like when they were on the planet, besides when Hux has his flashback to the Academy, it felt like the focus was more on Kylo than it was Hux, and Hux was a side character. In this comic, in my opinion, I feel like Hux is the main character, honestly, and Kylo's actually the side character going on a side quest, and I really, really like that. Now, of course, shocker, because, Hux is my favorite character. Whoa, I know, crazy. So, for me, seeing him in this, role was really, really a treat. How Snoke, I loved this line too, because Hux is always referred to as a rabid cur, as a rabid dog willing to kill for anything. And, Hux even says, I'm not weak, I'm patient. And it very much animalistic characteristics. And I love that. I think that it really helps the cunning characterization of Hux. What Snoke says when Hux talks back to him is, that's what you think means to show strength, General Hux? An animal that barks is an animal too afraid to bite. Ooh, my God. So, literally, Snoke is taunting him, but also he sees Hux as an animal, as a means, like an attack dog, almost like Kylo Ren as well, and he doesn't actually see him as a person, and I think that line was just so beautiful, and I of course, want to see what Hux thinks about that. You don't get much of that in this comic, but it is what it is. His whole talk with Kylo to himself, basically. We don't know if Kylo was communicating through his mind, but of course it's not in the panel here, but him basically seeing that, one of my favorite lines is, I'm not afraid of you, Ren. Your mere presence might strike fear into others commanding officers, but not me. I know how to handle this situation. I know how to achieve the resolution we seek. So Hux is very much in that position again of trying to hold everything together. And this is definitely pre-Force Awakens. I don't know. It just says in the front, this story takes place during the rise of the First Order, which the rise of the First Order is from at the end of The Last Jedi, not The Last Jedi, I always say Last Jedi, from the end of Return of the Jedi to Rise of Skywalker. So this could take place in the middle of, you know, like before Force Awakens, or in the middle of Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, or between Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. I don't know. There's a whole different things. Definitely not Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, because Snoke is still here, but you know what I mean? There's just no pinpoint into what this actually takes place in. But for Hux, I always see his character as him not being afraid of Ren, him not being afraid of Kylo because of his past makes so much sense, and I feel like people always miss that and don't understand what he has been through and why he does not fear Kylo Ren. And I feel like that is such a huge thing that does need to be focused on in the new, you know, stuff that we're seeing on the sequel trilogy. And I think Kylo might understand that. I think that he knows Hux isn't afraid of him, and that's the whole point why they don't get along that well, and why that's so important. So that was really interesting to me. Hux's whole plan, and him being very, I don't know if civil is the right word, but him being very political with the Caraxians and wanting to come to an agreement is very much his character, and wanting to not use brute force like Kylo Ren and use his mind to get what he wants. Like Hux's he does like a little smirk, or like the closest thing we get to a smile that he does when one of the people tells him about the, you know, monster that the town is trying to keep away, and just that glint in his eye, you can already tell that he has a terrible idea, but it's, you know, it's the only idea he has. And I don't know, it did seem a bit kind of out of character just because he was so brash to do it, and he was just like, well, you know, I'm just gonna do it and then we'll see how it goes. Doesn't really seem like his character, but this is in a 20-page comic, so I'm not really complaining about. We couldn't have 15 pages of Hux kind of just waiting and going through the odds of, oh, will this work? Oh, will this not? I should probably convene with Kylo Ren. And he probably wouldn't do that anyway. So him kind of just doing it a little out of character, but it doesn't like affect me. And I'm not mad at it at all. So I think it's completely fine. Hux almost dies in this comic. Wouldn't that be so funny? They just rewrite the entire canon, and it's basically just a sequel trilogy without Hux in it. I'm kidding. I would literally fight Dave Filoni in a lightsaber battle and totally win and kill him, because there's no way. But I digress. For Hux, I mean, him, like, literally almost being stomped on by the monster is really funny. And the fact that Kylo saves him is also even funnier, just because of, like, a boy. So that will lead me in to Kylux. Yay! What we're all here for, basically, and why I even got this comic. If you're not a huge ship person, or you do not ship Kylux, even, you know, if you don't, that's totally okay. I wouldn't mind if you listened. I might have some good points and some thick ideas. But if you're not a ship person, then this is where you should probably end off the video. I'm going to talk about ship stuff and then basically just end off the video. So let's talk about Kylux. Oh my lord, Kylux. Wow. This comic, the bromance is real. And when I say bromance, I mean there is some serious sexual tension between the two of them. And I'm sorry if you can't read that in the comic, but they just get so close to each other. It's just unnecessary. And I get it. People could be like, well, two men can stand next to each other. Of course they can. But have you seen Force Awakens? Have you seen some of the panels of this comic? They are literally almost kissing, and I'm not even exaggerating, okay? But basically, Kylux in this comic was very, very strong. They were strong in the Kylux, and they had their own elevator scene. I mean, they had their own elevator scene. Can I just say that for a second? Sure, it's only, Hux talking, but that was very reflective of Rey and Kylo's elevator scene in The Last Jedi, to where literally Rey was the only one talking. I mean, come on. The parallels are kind of crazy, guys. I love the fact that Hux admits that he's not afraid of Kylo Ren, and how Kylo doesn't try to scare him, and Kylo doesn't try to do anything, and he accepts that and he realizes that. And I feel like there's so many layers underneath that I just want to know more about how Kylo thinks of Hux and how Hux thinks of Kylo. Because we know they hate each other. I'm not going to say, oh my god, they love each other and it's all butterflies and rainbows. They despise each other. But I want to know if Hux does have pity for Kylo Ren and if Kylo Ren has pity for Hux. And pity is a powerful thing. It is not great, but it works very, very well in understanding how characters view others and how that character views themselves. I mean, Hux and Kylo are very much two very, very different characters, but when you start comparing their upbringing, their life, what their feelings are, how lonely they are, you start to understand the connections between the two of them and why these two characters are some of the best rivals in Star Wars and some of the best characters that do have scenes together, in my opinion, of course. I mean, for this comic, Hux and Kylo, they don't necessarily work together, but they don't argue with each other a lot, which is really odd to see, because in a lot of the other comics, even the General Hux comic, you have them arguing constantly. Hux is calling out Kylo, Kylo is calling out Hux. It's very hostile. But with this, they do their own thing. And yes, there's a couple of jabs, and, Kylo threatens him, and Hux uses Snoke as a crutch again. But for me, there's just something underneath there that it's like, why aren't you truly yelling at each other? And, now, of course, in this comic, it really shows us that there was no need for a disagreement. But I feel like that would have been really easy for the writers to write in if that was needed. You know what I mean? So why are they not fighting? Now, this could be... okay, we're going to get into major ship stuff right now. But as for Kylux, a lot of our headcanons are, not everyone's, but at least for me, if I'm talking about canon, the first 5 years, they, dated, right? And then right before Force Awakens, they break up. It's a huge, exes type thing. And that's why they hate each other. And they learn to hate each other even more and more, and it just never works out. For me, that works best. I do feel like they are an old married couple arguing in Force Awakens. But then it starts to turn abusive in The Last Jedi, and I think that's why you start to see that disconnect from Hux and Kylo. And especially in Rise of Skywalker as well, and why he turns spy. And for me, as a shipper, as someone who does that, I do like to take canon compliments and really dive into that and what the characters are thinking. And if theoretically, let's say, JJ was like, oh no, yeah, they were totally gay for 5 years and then they broke up, how does that affect the characters even more in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker? And for me, this comic, was maybe before that. and maybe they still don't like each other, right? But they have a bit of a calmer relationship compared to what we see them have in The Force Awakens. But, am I reading too much into it? Absolutely. But I'm so sorry. There was just so much Kylux content in this. The fact that Kylo leaves whatever force he saw to go save Hux, dude, what? That makes no sense, but it makes so much sense when you look at it from a ship standpoint. And yes, I know I'm reading too much into it, but we have seen in multiple comics of Kylo saving Hux. And for me, it makes no sense in the best way possible. I'm so happy that he saves him. It gives me more fuel to the fire. But why? Why does he do it? I want to know why. I want to know why he saved him from the crash in his comic. I want to know why Hux saved Kylo when he resided on the planet unconscious. Now, of course, they can use the crutch of, Snoke would not want you dead, or, Snoke would not want you gone. But even then, why does Kylo leave Hux alive in The Rise of Skywalker? Sure, he doesn't necessarily demote him, but he promotes pride. But why does he leave him alive? It doesn't make any sense. And even when in the original script for Rise of Skywalker, Kylo, Supreme Leader, gave Hux the Chancellor position. It makes no sense, but in the best way possible, as I said, because it does give me fuel to the fire, and it makes me really think they do have so much of a connection, and what and how could that be built upon from a shipping standpoint, but even from a characterization standpoint. Does Hux see himself in Kylo? Does Hux realize, is Kylo basically what Hux would be like if he wasn't so calm and collected? I always think about that, because Kylo is very much, his emotions are all over the place, and Hux is more subdued and gets things done. But why? What is their connection? Right? I don't know. You just kind of have to think about it. I love these characters, and I ship them so hard. It's my OTP. But with this comic, I always just wonder what the writers, if there's a specific person at Lucasfilm focusing on General Hux and Kylo Ren and their relationship. And I know that's so not the forefront, and it's so stupid to think, but I always hope that they're at least in some people's thoughts, because these are such good characters. Now, of course, everyone wants their character to be at the forefront of, these amazing, writers and directors' minds. But for me, there's so much story that they can tell with that. And there's so much there, even in a children's comic, that we get out of these characters and their relationship. You can't beat it anywhere. The amount of dialogue, the amount of emotion I feel when experiencing these characters together, it's special, and I do wish that they would develop on it. It will probably not be developed on, but I'm just going to say this now. The fact that we're getting, comics about these characters still, and these characters are still being talked about. Brendol Hux shows up in The Mandalorian. I mean, that was not on my bingo card for this year. It wasn't. It really, really wasn't, and yet it happened. And with Ahsoka already ended, Thrawn returning, it holds so much room for the First Order, but specifically for Kylo and Hux. And I just do hope that we get more of their relationship in the future. But anyway, guys, if you have read the comic, let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Or were you kind of indifferent on it and moved on with your life? I wish I could. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. I do appreciate the support. If you have any podcast ideas, also put them in the comments. And I will see you guys in the next one.